today I thought it would be fun to talk about newspapers, not only because I've had almost a 40-year career in it myself, but I think political science people make the connection and the importance the information relays to citizens to make informed decisions. And there's no secret that the industry has been in a lot of change, and I think we'll hear from some experts today that the doom and gloom picture isn't perhaps what it really is made out to be, but like with any change, like the auto industry in Michigan or other things, that things aren't the same as they used to be. And I happen to be one of the people that believes that's good. But the issue is trying to convince those in the industry, and more importantly to me, convince society of the important role that the press plays in society. And I think it's going to be one of those things that we're so used to having it that if we don't have it, they'll realize they'll be sorry that we lost it. And I'm not inferring that that's going to happen. But when you go to another country and you realize that you can't speak out. I was in Morocco last year, and the front page was how this person had been arrested for making a derogatory comment about the king's brother in a newspaper. And it was sort of a trial, but he ended up having, engineering professor ended up having 3 years in prison, for just making some little parody about the king's brother. Well, it just turns out that you're not supposed to write about the king's family in any regard at all without their permission. So when you get into those situations, you realize how fortunate we are here in this country to pretty well speak our mind, suffer the consequences later, but at least we get to have it out. So today I have actually 3 very good friends of mine, whom all have had many different experiences with the press and dealing with political science. Paul Keep is the editor of the Grand Rapids Press, and he's here after a year just surviving it. He oversees the newsroom operations and opinion operations, and the Press, which I didn't realize, is now the largest afternoon newspaper and the largest Michigan newspaper with 7 days of home delivery. Paul has been at 5 newspapers in Michigan. He's had 27 years of experience, which really gives him a great perspective, I think, of the state. He started his report at the Kalamazoo Gazette, and then he became a news editor at the Muskegon Chronicle, then the editor of the Bay City Times and the Flint Journal, and then he returned to Chronicle as the editor in 2006. And later, as often happens to all of us, he also became the publisher too. That's what they call downsizing, I think, right? I was a victim of that myself. He's a graduate of Kalamazoo Central High School and Miami University with a bachelor's degree in political science, so he's one of us, and the University of Missouri with a master's degree in journalism. Paula Holmes Greeley is, gosh, I've known her almost since high school, is the editorial page editor of the Muskegon Chronicle, a position she's held for 2 years. Prior to that, she was the news editor of the Chronicle for 14 years, and she oversaw photography, features, and production, and a function that now they combined with another, I assume the Grand Rapids Press, is that who you're doing it with? Yeah. And under a new operating model that we'll probably hear a little bit about today. I know her because she was previously the managing editor of the Petoskey News Review, the world's greatest small daily, and also the other world's greatest small weekly, the Charlotte Courier. She refers to this, and you have to understand if you've been in the news business, that she's also worked on the dark side. And by that, she worked in public relations, which we don't talk about too much, but she worked for a regional hospital, a clinic, and railroad. And the other reason I really was interested in her coming is that she was press secretary for G. Minnan Williams. Excuse me, G. I'm dating myself. William Milliken. And so she's been in a lot of different perspectives. She worked for him as assistant press secretary, actually, after working on his political campaign, and I still have a clipping of her getting a speeding ticket near Brighton trying to get around on a political campaign. She's served as editor-in-residence at Michigan State School of Journalism. She's won numerous awards in news, business, and editorial writing, as well as content and design. And she wanted to also, for me to mention that she has a political science cognate as part of her undergraduate degree. And if that wasn't enough, she also knows how to speak Russian. Dennis Duggan, who has equally a variety of experiences, is a professor of political science at North Central, where he's been there as a full-time professor since 2002, and previously has taught as an adjunct since 1966. He teaches political sciences, religion, and sociology. He's a club advisor for the Student Veterans and Campus Ministry, and serves on a core team for a program we have called Achieve the Dream, which is really a student retention program. Come on in, have a seat. Oh, I didn't realize you were recording us today. Thank you. Sorry. Be careful what you say. He previously, though, in another life, was the administrator for the Catholic Human Services of Northern Michigan, and then before that was the program manager for the San Antonio Housing Authority from 1991 to 1994, where they organized and supported some 500 low-income families to gain economic independence through education and employment. He also was the executive director of the Center for the Homeless in 1990. Was that in South Bend?
No, well,
was that still the same?
There were two. There was
I'll change
San
the program.
Antonio, yeah.
He was also in San Antonio, and he also worked in a similar program in South Bend. But if that wasn't enough, he had a third career. He was in the military service, and he's a project manager as an Army Reserve officer from 1983 to 1986, where he planned and executed a project that established Defense Department contingency medical facilities in Europe. Before that, when he was a regular Army officer from 1996 to 1982, he was a helicopter pilot. He flew in the Air Ambulance unit in Vietnam. He's a recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross, Bronze Star, and he had 19 air medals. And he demonstrated all that driving down in our van to get to Grand Rapids.
Hang on.
And followed by assignments as a human resources person. So all these people have had a multitude of experiences, and I've asked them today to talk about our topic, the death of newspapers. And I think maybe I'll start out with Paula, because she's our opinion writer and always has a lot of opinions, as she did when she worked with me. So Paula, thank you for coming today.
Thanks. Well, when I learned the title of this panel, Death of Newspapers, I was reminded of that Mark Twain quote when he found out that his obituary had been published in the New York Journal. He is reported to have said, the reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. And I think the same can be said for newspapers. A lot of people, thinkers have written newspapers' obituary, and but I think their death is greatly exaggerated. And it's clear the business model needs to be updated, and the delivery system needs to enter the electronic age. Of course, the good news is that trees everywhere, are breathing a sigh of relief. I don't want to dwell too much on the business side because that's a topic really for greater minds than mine, like my colleague Paul Keep. But it looks to me like newspapers, the dead tree media, are going to become the shapeshifters of the 21st century. And I think they're going to show up, they already are showing up in electronic versions that mimic the printed, on websites, in iPad versions, and on various blogs. And they've become pretty much 24/7. The reason for my optimism is I think people don't want to live in a cocoon. They want to grab a hold of the world and make a difference. I think that's a basic thing with almost everybody. And they want their news to come from a trusted source. As much as they complain about and criticize that source, I think they still value that information. And I think the best source locally and probably nationally is some sort of newspaper organization. They're the only ones that are still investing in the staff that's needed. What readers haven't figured out yet is they're going to have to pay for this information. And they've been paying through subscriptions, and eventually I think they'll figure out a way to get back to that. Certainly the residents of Bell, California have learned that lesson the hard way. You probably remember this town. It's a town of 40,000. 1 out of 6 residents lives in poverty. The average salary there is $28,000. And until last summer, the city manager was earning nearly $800,000 a year, and he had a compensation package of over $1 million. The mayor, several council members, the assistant city manager were all on the gravy train, and they managed to misappropriate about $5 million starting in 2008. So how did all this happen? Well, some people say it's because of cutbacks in the newspaper coverage there. no one was keeping an eye on the ball or encouraging citizens to do it. And I'm guessing that those citizens probably would have gladly paid $1 a day for better coverage. And at some point, they're going to realize, readers are going to realize, citizens are going to realize that they either have to get out of their chairs and go to the meetings, or they're going to have to pay for somebody else to do it. And if you think this is just an isolated incident, recently, within the last 2 weeks, I think, the Grand Rapids Press uncovered what appears to be a similar situation in a neighboring school district. I really became convinced of the important role that newspapers play in society, not as a journalism student and not even as a reporter, but as a newly minted state employee. I had been working about 6 weeks on the governor's staff. I'd been hired to fill an open position. But 90 days earlier, I had been a member of the campaign staff. And I came into work that day and I opened the Detroit News and saw my own picture. And the news article made it painfully clear that they thought I was part of campaign graft. And it reviewed my salary and my experience and laid it all out. At least I wasn't related to the governor or anyone on his staff. I'm not sure who all read that story besides my mom and the moms of the other people mentioned, but I want to set the record straight. I earned that position, but it's a good thing that they asked the question. While government coverage is the meat and potatoes of news, opinion also is an important part of what newspapers do. And the new buzzword right now for letters to the editor and the online postings underneath them is community conversation. And it is going strong, both in the traditional form, which is where people write letters to us, in the electronic form where they're emailing and where they're posting. I've been editorial page editor at the Chronicle for about 18 months, and it's been an amazing experience. Part of what I do is monitor those posts under editorials and letters and columns. And I'm looking for reader reactions and possible future editorial ideas, or maybe, actually I am also looking for weak links in my own arguments that I've made in editorials to make sure that next time I can fill in the gaps. And we've got a group of regulars. I call them the trolls because they're curmudgeons and because they live under the, under the actual letters and editorials and columns that we print. But every day I see new names. And sometimes they're there for a couple days. Sometimes they're just there once. But they're new and they're joining the conversation. And I wonder, you know, why are they there? They could be blogging, they could be talking to their neighbors, or they could be on Facebook. And they probably are. But I think they want the organization, they want the local content, they want to talk about issues bigger than their evening plans. And they don't want 120 characters on someone's coffee being extra hot. I think really they don't give a tweet about that. Just last week, I got an email from a local industrialist. He's the chairman of the airport committee in our county. I'd written an editorial, the editorial board had offered an opinion and suggested that they meet with another committee as they were looking at ways to make more money or to make cuts. And he sent me a little note saying that they had actually done that. And it was thrilling to me, but it makes my point, and that is the reason that we will have newspapers in some form is because of the way that they connect with the community. I think that they connect in a way that no other media does.
Thank you very much. Paul, would you like to?
Yes, well, I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the panel, and I want to start out by having us all congratulate Paula. It was recently announced in the Michigan Press Association Awards contest for this year that she took second place in editorial writing. So she's good at what she does, very good. And I say that partly because I helped put her there.
Yes, you did.
Before I left, I was publisher and editor there.
And I'm grateful.
There are many fathers, right, to success. But I thought I'd just talk a few minutes about my perspectives. As Ken pointed out, I've kind of moved around the state of Michigan. And for the Delta people here, I've been the editor at the Bay City paper, and have worked at smaller papers, middle-sized papers, and now the biggest paper in our company. And we're picking nits a little bit when we say, I guess, that we're the largest Michigan paper that has 7-day home delivery. That's true, But of course, the free press has a larger circulation, even though they're not home delivered all those days. So, but we are truly the largest afternoon paper in all of the nation. I think that's because we resisted the big movement toward morning publication that everyone else took. So why that is, I don't know completely. But of course, as an editor, I've got to tweak your session title a little bit, and it's certainly provocative. It's probably something we'd congratulate our headline writers for to draw readership. The truth of the matter is, if you define newspapers strictly in their print form, we probably are on a path toward the end of that. So I guess death of newspapers could be accurate in that sense. But I can tell you, I know Paula can tell you too, and Ken, that we have a lot of people who depend on us every day for their information. Paula mentioned some of the specifics, and we can get into that more maybe when we open it up for discussion. But if you ever doubt that, you know, have a mistake appear in the paper, have someone profiled in the paper, and the feedback they get at the grocery store, barbershop, you know, church, wherever, is incredible. And we had just that kind of profile of the city manager a couple of weeks ago in our paper on Sunday, and I saw him later at a reception a week or two later, still buzzing about all the people that came up to him. And he made a point of saying, which I always like to repeat, most of the people that came up to him were young people, not old people, which is a good thing. Some of our research, you've heard about the Nielsen ratings for broadcast media. There's a Scarborough survey that newspapers often subscribe to, and it takes the temperature of readership in all the different markets. And one that happened recently, I came to Grand Rapids July of '09, so this must have been in the fall of '09 or early 2010, indicated of all the Sunday readers, about 400,000 Sunday readers of the press. And if you take three age groups, 18 to 34, 35 to 54, and then 55 and above, and I would use this when I'd go out to Rotary clubs or Kiwanis clubs or be asked to talk to any group. And I said, guess which of those three age groups have more readers of the Sunday press? And of course, they all say 55 and above. The fact is, it's 18 to 34. Now, percentage-wise, I'll grant you a higher percentage of those 55 and above read the paper. And but we're over 50% even in the 18 to 34. So if you look at print newspapers, we're certainly in a transition. We're moving from an era where that was the only way to deliver information. We had the once-a-day deadline. Everything was kind of geared up or planned, everyone's day, all the reporters, all the editors, all the photographers, in a mad rush to meet the deadline. And then you kind of recharge and see what you can get for tomorrow's paper or Sunday's paper, or if you're a weekly, the next week. And we've been converting for, I think mlive.com is probably 15 years old, maybe 20, 15,
Wow.
10. What are you going to? So that's our foray into the digital world. And so we've already been converted basically to a 24/7 operation. Paula alluded to that. So when we go cover a sensational, interesting court case, the reporter for the Grand Rapids Press could be tweeting or emailing something to be posted on mlive.com, in addition to writing whatever he or she needs to do for print. So I think the painful part of this is we're in a transition. Much of our loyal audience prefers print, but you have to pay for print. The online component right now is not paid, it's free, has almost the same content, and isn't restricted by the once-a-day deadline. Suddenly you've got new tools that we never had before, almost enough to make Ken want to get back in the business probably. I mean, we can do video with smartphones that's fine quality for online. You can do audio. We have podcasts and people debating things that we put on MLive all the time. You can break news like only TV could or radio could in the past. So there's a lot of that really liberates us and gives us new tools, and we need to, as Paula alluded, the question mark in all this, and the reason there's been pain and the word death would be used, is you've seen papers fold, you've seen layoffs at papers, you've seen days of publication cut out. Those are not healthy signs. But if you also look beyond the print and you incorporate all readership, online readership, we now have e-editions, electronic editions of the paper. The print readership is still strong, but obviously the circulation is declining. But the Scarborough survey shows us we have more readership than we ever have. We're reaching more people than we ever have. The business model that Paula alluded to in the past has been advertisers paid about 70–75% of the freight. Circulation picked up 20–25%. And the customer obviously was paying for about a fourth of the cost of putting out a newspaper. So it was a bargain, right? 10 cents, 25 cents, 50 cents, 75 cents now. $2 on Sunday, used to be quite a bit less. In the new world, the jury's out, but I think what's going to happen is technology is changing. We need to react to that. We will react to that. Some of the ad money you see in print is going to flow into the electronic world. Will the same amount flow? Big question mark. Not sure about that. But I have no doubt, just like Paula, that what we offer a community is needed and it's valuable, and I think a community would be worse off. You know, when you do read about newspapers that fold, especially if it's the only paper in town, and our company basically had one of those happen last year. The Ann Arbor News was in such red ink that they folded up, went away. The name doesn't exist as far as an ongoing publication, and our owners, that's one of our papers, was one of our papers. Our owners made a decision to go with, to kind of jump right into a full-fledged online model, and they chose the name AnnArbor.com. And very recently, we just had news that in a national ranking of the best websites as far as news websites, as far as market penetration, so reaching the highest percentage of households in their market, which is kind of what circulation used to be for newspapers. AnnArbor.com was #1 in the entire country. I'm also glad to say that mlive.com/Grand Rapids, which is our site, was #7. So we're gaining readers. We're still having impact. What are we, a couple weeks or less than that from an election? And that's when, of course, all the crazies come out. You guys are in political science, you know this like I do. But passions run hot, and letters to the editor flow, and the online commenting is vigorous and a little more anonymous, as we pointed out, and we get ripped for that quite a bit. That might be a question that comes up, but why do we allow anonymous commenting in the online world but not in the print world? So you've got a number of these things happening that reinforce to me the idea that journalism is not dead or dying. The way we deliver it is evolving and changing, and that's probably healthy. I mean, print's had a pretty good run, if you think about it, from Gutenberg roughly to now or even into the future. I still believe we're going to be printing newspapers for a long time. I expect to be working for another 12 to 15 years, and I think it'll still be in print all that time. Although I will tell you, the pace of change in recent years is staggering, and any predictions have to be kind of taken with a grain of salt. So maybe I'll bring it to a close there and look forward to the discussion later.
Thank you very much, Paul. Dennis?
I want you to know I got the memo and he got the memo.
That's right.
What happened?
I'm on my way to Florida.
Oh, listen to you. I'm still trying to figure out why I'm sitting here. This was an inside deal because I'm his driver, and I brought him to this, and he said, I have to have you do something while you're here. I have to laugh about my first experience with the media. I'm flying medevac missions in Vietnam, and a young reporter came up and said, I want to spend the day and see what you guys go through, and da-da-da. So in those days, the reporters didn't get the help they get now from the Defense Department. They're really over there on their own, and this guy's got no chicken plate to wear. That's my armored vest, by the way. And so we get him the double one, so he's got one back and one in front, because he's going to be riding around the back of the aircraft. And medevacs don't have door guns, so he doesn't have to defend the aircraft and help us. We just have to dodge bullets. And the first patient we go to pick up is a fever of unknown origin. And simple mission, we go out to a base, pick this kid up, bring him back to the hospital. And for some strange reason, I guess this was all the reporter needed. And he disappeared for the rest of the day. And then he's got a national story about the 159th medevac, da-da-da-da-da. And we all chuckle. To this day, we still chuckle. See, if he stayed around for the third mission, he would really know what Forrest Gump went through. Remember in the movie, Forrest has a dull day, and then suddenly all of those tracer rounds come right at Forrest and at you, because they really, actually, I had a flashback when I saw that movie. I hit the floor. My kids couldn't figure out why is Daddy on the floor at Forrest Gump. If they had just stayed around, he would have gotten the real story of what we do, because we got shot up. Woo. Now, second time I'd have anything to do with media, I'm running homeless centers. And I figure out that if I can use the editorial pages and the Metro pages, I'll get more money. So I wed myself to the local San Antonio newspapers. And I take them through my center. I have them right in the palm of my hand. Every time any issue comes down from the federal government, state government, local government on homeless, they call me. I become their source. And every time the San Antonio Metropolitan Ministry is on the newspapers and my name appears, checks appear. Checks appear. I know how to manipulate the media. And I did that for years, both in homelessness and in working for public housing. And the only reason I got hired at the public housing wasn't necessarily to be a motivational person to help single household get out of public housing. Our executive director was having problems with the media to the point where he wouldn't go on talk radio. And the second day I was there, he said, I know you're highly qualified to motivate people to get their education and get out, but guess what your additional duty is? I said, what? You get all of the talk shows. You're the one who has to do the image business with us in public housing. How does all this play out in my classrooms? I'm a double master's. I have a master's in public administration, University of Texas, San Antonio. When a guy named Henry Cisneros was teaching, I'm one of his followers. That's the nicest thing we'll say about that. And then I got an opportunity, only in '99, to go back to school again. In the Lilly Foundation, I'm still one of their scholars. I have a master's of divinity that I took in residence. That's 78 hours of schooling, not a PhD. MDiv. So at my college, I'm actually the full-time, part-time poli-sci guy. I only, half of my load is poli-sci, and I'll just explain in a minute how I've worked the media into that. And then, because I have that second degree, I teach marriage and family, death and dying, and the history of religion in America. Now, if you want to be creative and work journalism and media into each of those, you can. One of the things we have to do, and you wrestle with this every day, I wrestle with this, you need to know we have to wrestle with this in the classroom every day. A student will make a remark, and you're trying to teach them critical thinking, and your first thought is, I wonder where he got that or she got that. And it's never from a reliable source. Or at least 99% of the time, 1% of the time, they might have read a real source. Instead, there are so many areas they can draw from. And the second part is, did you read it? No, I heard it. I saw it. I was told by a buddy that. And where did he get it? So you're really in journalism, whether you survive in the mode of the print media, and I'm all for Gutenberg. There wouldn't have been a Reformation without having the ability to broadcast what Luther's thinking. If it hadn't been for, those people checking and double checking, and then in our own country, Franklin and the rest taking a look at what they're publishing in Philadelphia and doing that, we wouldn't have the fact checking and going on. And one of the critical skills is critical thinking. And if the students can't take a look at 2 or 3 different views, and they're only taking the one view, the one outlet, the one source, the one that, then you're right, we're all in trouble. It's not just that somebody's going to go out of business. We're not going to have a democracy. We're not going to have people who are educated enough to make the decisions. I've gone to, my major writing assignment, believe it or not, is a letter to the editor in the intro class. It teaches them conventional participation. They have to think their thoughts through. They have to go through all of those steps. And if they only do that in my intro class, I'm happy that they know how to do it, where their role is, how they can participate with the media, and at least getting some more views out there. When you're having to deal with death panels in death and dying classes, you see how information can be misrepresented. And constantly I'm having to say to my students, where did you get that information? And it's sound bites, it's political advertising, it's some interest group that is doing what I used to do, spin the media. I spin the media for hundreds of thousands of dollars in San Antonio, and I know how people can spin the media to get their information out. So I'm constantly finding myself all day long, whether I'm in a religion class, a social class, or in a poli-sci section, having to constantly deal with, are you folks still surviving? Are you still out there? Are you still a reliable source? Are you having people fact check other people? And I depend on your existence, because to have credible, critical thinking done, we have to do that. Now, I have to let you in on one other thing, and community college people understand this really well. I wish more of the university people were in here. 60% of the students at our community college are forced, we have a new policy, are forced that if you have to have remedial math, you have to take it. If you can't write, you can't take other courses until you do the 95. Well, the reason they can't write is they can't read. And you're looking at two guys who have had to change totally in some courses and partially in other courses the approach we take towards our students. We have to help them to just learn how to read and critically read, and for that matter, enjoy reading, because that part of their education is lacking. And so we do things like reading logs now under our Achieve the Dream. It's more work for us because once you give it to them, you've got to look at it. And so, but it's starting to have a positive impact because the discussion time in the class has gone up. Suddenly, we're not carrying the lecture, we're not carrying 100%. They really are reading. But we have to continue to design ways to encourage people to do a basic skill, just to be able to read. And then they would appreciate what you do for a living. If they would just read. I might get an amen. Can I have an amen from the Delta people? Amen. Amen.
Thank you very much. As you can see, we've had really three great diverse observations of the newspaper and the press and different ways of using it. Paula, you touched on something that actually was a huge debate at our local Rotary Club that I don't think my successor, the publisher of the paper, had expected, and that was this controversy that you talked about. Not controversy, but this, and Paul alluded to it too, this why do we allow signed letters to the editor, and yet another part of us allows these blogs that you can pretty well put anything on it you want, even though they're monitored to a certain degree. How do you justify that dichotomy? Yeah. Yeah. Since you're the opinion editor.
Well, about almost a year into my job, I was reading the comments of one of my trolls, and I was really angry. And actually, it was a comment that had been deleted, but because I was looking at it through a different tool, I could still see it. And I went on a tear. I went to the editor. I went to the general manager. I said, we got to stop this stuff. This is irresponsible, blah, 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 blah. And then a columnist sent in a column about freedom of speech. And it caught me short. I thought, spent my entire career, built on freedom of speech and information and so on. And I really had to rethink this whole thing. We have encouraged people to sign their blogs. And actually there's a little bit of a movement. We probably have, it's not real successful, but we probably have maybe a dozen people that are now actually, I believe, signing their names. I don't really know that for sure. But the reason that we do it in print, we have a long history of requiring names and addresses in print, is, and I tell people all the time, is, it gives validity to your opinion to know that there's a real person. And we do, I think most newspapers too, we call all of our letter writers to confirm that they are real people, and occasionally we stumble across a fake letter. So, we do try to keep that validity out there. The posting, I think it would decline, because a lot of it is nastier, I think, when it's anonymous. But there's enough of it that is really thoughtful that I don't want to get rid of it. And I'm not sure, and actually the more thoughtful ones often are signed. So I don't know what to say about that. I think that there will be pressure. I think our attitude has been that there will be pressure from the other posters to clean up your act. And there has been, because they flag, you know how that goes. Of course, they get mad at one person and everybody flags every comment that they make. But we've got, we have an independent company that reviews all these comments so that we're not, which is comfortable for me, we're not the ones making that decision. It's being made elsewhere and without, the prejudices that might come from knowing individuals and so on. So it's a hard thing to rationalize, but I think that the community conversation that comes with all of that is healthy. So I don't want to discourage it.
If I can just add a few things, I think Paul is exactly right, but what you have to remember is that the printed newspaper is fundamentally different than the internet.
Yeah.
And we try very hard, because I guess we're traditional, to apply the standards that applied for, in the press's case, 120 years of publication to this new technology. Well, this new technology is so different, you can't apply it. You've got the Wild West, basically, where you have, and some people really enjoy this. You don't have the traditional filters that we provide as news gatherers and what's the phrase that they call us, gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Vetting stuff. It's a free Wild West out there, and it gets to your point, Dennis, about what do you believe, and just because you saw it on a comment on the web doesn't make it accurate. Frankly, just because you see it in the printed press, you should have a certain level of skepticism. I mean, we're in the middle of it, and we know how hard our staff works to be objective when that's their job, or be opinionated when that's their job, and to get all the facts, but we're human beings. I mean, this is not a perfect system in any way, but Paul is correct that the theory that we're being told from the people who are more internet conscious maybe than we are is that if you at the paper see a string of comments that are way off base and start from a false premise, our job is to enter into that and say, without being argumentative or snarky, as tempting as it may be, to just say, well, such and such a report says this, or our reporting uncovered this. We just did some things on endorsements because it's that time of year. So every comment almost underneath the endorsements, if you didn't like our endorsement, was you shouldn't be endorsing. Newspapers shouldn't do this. And sometimes I can't help myself but say, newspapers have been doing this longer than any of us have been alive. So it's not like it should be shocking to you. And yet they act like they've never seen it. So the good part about the internet is you've got way more information, about Google and all. I mean, there's just so much at our fingertips. We are one source, and we're getting our feet wet and diving in. But there's a lot of competing information, and our future depends on people being able to discern what's true and what's not true, or what's true for them. And I don't think you can put the rules of the print world into the internet world.
Thank you.
Paul made a good point that I just want to expand on too, and that is more and more reporters are looking at the posts under their stories. And if there's some sort of factual debate, they will clarify it. They don't get into the snarky debate, and we've done that a little bit under letters. And we do it in print too. If someone writes a letter to the editor and there's we'll add an editor's note that explains either the point or provides the fact or whatever. And what it does is just stimulate conversation. And you see it happen even in the posts. I see it a couple times a week. Somebody will say, the definition of an editorial is opinion,
I love to be accused of bias with an editorial. It's always fun.
And that happens regularly. but it's interesting. It's interesting the back and forth that's going on, and I think it's healthy. Do I like the snarkiness? No. Is it their right? Yes. So.
Paul, I want you to put your business hat on too for just a minute. There's been a lot of concern about the evolution of 24/7 news. At the same time, having 24/7 news, we've reduced our workforce in the newsroom to gather the news. And a lot of people I've read say that, well, the 24/7 news cycle really has basically encouraged a lot what we'd call less quality news. And so you're sitting there with less feet on the ground and more space to fill either online or in print. How do you deal with that?
Well, that is the challenge of editors and reporters and everyone in the newsroom right now. Let me paint the picture that I walked into in July of 2009 because it helps illustrate that. The press at that time, well, let's say January 1st of 2009, probably had a newsroom that was in excess of 100 people, maybe 130. I'm kind of guessing here. And as I walked in the door, the exact same day I walked in the door, July 1st, about 20 buyout takers were walking out the door in Grand Rapids and some in Muskegon and earlier that year. So we get into the budget so we're continuing to try to keep our quality high and report meaningful things and make the press interesting and fulfilling its duty. It's tougher, and we've got challenges, and we're trying to obviously work harder and smarter. But then we go right into the budget process, 2009, looking ahead to 2010, and that resulted in the first layoffs that our company has ever made. We had a written policy in the policy handbook given to every employee that you will not be laid off for, technology changes or a bad economy or I mean, you could still be fired, obviously, for poor performance, but that wasn't too common either. So you had a very different environment, and that rule was lifted because of the way the economy and the industry was going. And so our budget process ended up leading to another 15 people laid off. And also the merging of copy desks. The copy desk is where, once the raw material of the reporting is gathered, the actual pages of the paper go together and stories are given a final edit. They are fit, which page they're going to go on is determined and headlines are written. So it's a crucial aspect. Paula oversaw that in Muskegon for many years. But for efficiency reasons, we brought the copy desk of Muskegon, Kalamazoo, and Grand Rapids into one unit based in Grand Rapids where they could basically more efficiently handle the page flow. And our copy desk has been fairly successful. It's almost a year old now. This is happening across the newspaper industry, and I think Andy Angelo, my news editor, said we're handling 500 to 600 pages per week through the copy desk for the 3 different papers plus a number of weekly editions. So always striving for efficiencies. So you think about the morale in our newsroom when you've had buyout takers who are the experienced veteran people with that kind of knowledge Ken's talking about, who are also looked up to in the newsroom by the younger generation and role models and that kind of thing. So they walk out the door. Many of them still freelancing for us, so their bylines haven't completely gone, and that's one thing that's helped our quality. But that's a severe blow. Then you have layoffs on top of that. And what's interesting to me is you had that kind of prologue, and then we rolled out what we called the Michigan 10.0 series, which was 10 monthly installments in great depth about what we felt and asked readers to help us determine which were the most important issues facing Michigan. Here's a year we're going to elect a new governor because of term limits, wide open primaries in both parties. We didn't want the usual chasing the polls, he's ahead, she's ahead, whatever, or the soundbite that you get on TV for the issue discussion. We wanted to go deeper, and what surprised everyone and has really boosted morale is that it was appreciated by readers. It was a pretty good series. Kalamazoo and Muskegon picked up parts of it, actually the whole state in our company. Bay City, Saginaw, Flint, AnnArbor.com even, which has a print edition, ran at Jackson. So good journalism is still being done. It's harder to do. It's a challenge. What you're seeing across the newspaper business, and it's just going to continue, I'm sure, is a flattening of management layers that maybe grew up over time because we could. Now you're saying you're more valuable to this newspaper and to its readers if you're creating content I don't need you sitting in a room planning or, you know, overseeing personnel, and of course, some of that still has to be done. I hope to do it, but I may have to do it for everyone. But we need people actually writing and providing content, because some people have left us, and we don't see readers saying, well, we don't need any more of that. You know, we're fine, we'll take less and pay you the same. So I don't know if I get to that answer completely, but
I think it's
we're doing
good
some
for
good
people to
things.
understand that the quality hasn't necessarily walked out the door, and that newspapers who traditionally have been known for their more in-depth reporting than our electronic broadcast brethren are able to still figure out creative solutions to maintain that quality and provide that needed information. And I've always subscribed to the idea back, even when I was in management, particularly with a smaller company, that we did a lot with less all the time. That was just our MO. And the larger papers are now faced with an issue that we've always had. And I know Paula can go back, because I would always hire somebody of Paula's background, because she had had an environment of doing that all the time. The editor, you know, wrote stories, editorials, laid out pages, did headlines, plus dealt with the public, plus the staff. I mean, that's always been the nature of the smaller market paper. And now the larger papers are discovering this new world that a lot of us grew up in. Dennis, I wanted to ask you a question from an educator's background. I'm so glad today you brought up this issue of critical thinking. I'm still toying, and I wanted to ask this for our educators. How do we get people to drink the water? I actually, in all my classes that are related to political science, force them every week to read one of a different media, and by the end of the semester, they have read 14. Everything from the Charlevoix Courier to the New York Times to the Grand Rapids Press, and they have to do a weekly critical evaluation of that media that they watched, including, and I threw in Jon Stewart at the end just for fun, but I want them to discern the different types of media, and most of them, like, had never heard of the Christian Science Monitor and realized it wasn't necessarily a lunatic publication, you know, put out by the Moonies. But they had not been introduced to that, and that's been my way of forcing them to at least be exposed once a week to something different than, you know, their Facebook or whatever else they're using to communicate in the social media between themselves. And I'm sort of curious, Dennis, that you brought up the critical thinking idea. How do you get people beyond, and I commend you for doing a letter to the editor, that's a good first step, but how else would you get your students in all your different classes engaged to understand the importance of the media?
The real issue here isn't where you hook them in. It's being consistent with the message, to stand your ground. And the first day of class last year in the Death and Dying, I had announced that you'll have to do reading logs, you'll have to bring me justification
You
facts.
might tell them what a reading log is.
A reading log is you've given a chapter, you have 2 columns, write down the exact moment and place that you had an aha. Give me the page number and give me a phrase so I can check it myself. And then how you interpreted that. And it's how they interpret it. I don't care how you interpret it. I just want you to engage that sentence. I want you to engage the author. You can agree, disagree. Just show me that you've taken time to massage that for a minute. That's the short version of that. Then, by the way, I use those for a warm-up. What I'll do is I'll have them exchange those for about 10 minutes in class before we get into the meat. And I'll say, see what your fellow students were doing with that. And they sit together, and then they got this big log. They have to meet everybody in the classroom, so you can't sit with the same person. So there's a lot of extra work that goes into using these devices and doing all this. But they get to, by the end of the semester, they know everybody. You know, 25 new friends. And they know what they're thinking because they've had to read what the other people are thinking.
And it's not on Facebook.
It's not on Facebook. So this was actually the second semester any of us have been trying this. There are only about 8 of us out of the faculty of 33 full-timers and 100 plus part-timers who are doing this. And this one student looked at me and said, you know, Eric made me do this last semester in such and such a class, and I don't like it. And she made the mistake of doing that in front of the other 30 students. I loved it. I love theater like this. And so I just looked at her and kept my voice just calm, direct. I said, you're not going to like it again this time. There are no exceptions. We're all in this boat together. And you can go to my boss, you can go to anybody you want, or you can just find somebody else. Well, you're the only one teaching this. I guess we're going to have to learn to live with this. And so it's been the consistency and the reinforcement. It's not which vehicle you use, it's being consistent with them saying, this is tough love. We're going to do this, and we're still going to have to do this. Because a lot of people have simply, on faculty, said, well, you know, I don't know where you find the time. I said, I don't know either. But if it isn't done, it isn't going to be an improvement. But remember, I bring all the biases of working with homeless people, then public housing people, and other people. So I'm kind of used to the personalities and the deals we have to do. And in that business, I had to do tough love where you couldn't run a building with 250 souls a night in it. So, you know, I bring that kind of experience. So if I can encourage others, and by the way, we've now doubled the size. There are about 16 of us now who are working on this new level. And I didn't say this earlier, one of the 3 sections I do teach in government every semester, they are 95 students. They are 95 English students, and their instructor and my instructor, or I'm their other instructor for poli-sci, those assignments are looked at 2 and 3 different ways. Because the English prof is looking at them, I'm looking at them. And in addition to the letter to the editor, she's actually training them to take the essay questions and to be able to format their answers in the essay questions. And they're also surprised when they go in to take the final, because all my sections, whether you're linked, whether you're having other difficulties, everybody takes the same essay final. And they come in and see a big question right at the beginning going, oh, I know how to answer that. I just had to do that in Deb's class in English. So it's uplifting. They've had to work with it. They've had to massage it. They've had to come to some conclusions. So I'm in a link program with the English department. Yes?
Yep, I was just going to introduce it to Acton. Go ahead.
Tom and I teach political science at Delta.
Right.
Faculty.
We met you last year.
Oh, okay, good. In my class, I have always, from the very beginning, had my students read newspapers. And they want to read CNN.com, they want to read the ABC.com, they want to read all these others. I said, no, you're going to do the newspapers. Now, you can pick them up in paper form, you can do them online, you can get them for free, but I want you to do newspapers. I require them to look at a local newspaper, a state newspaper, and a national newspaper. And this is my intro to national government. When I teach world politics, I require them to look at Christian Science Monitor or Al Jazeera or Der Spiegel or something like that. But for my intro to national government, I say newspapers. And I keep drilling it into them that newspapers are the best kind of source for responsible journalism, okay? And so what they'll do is they'll go online, which is the easiest, and they'll put in a word that we talked about in class. Because the assignment is, find 3 articles that have something to do with what we're talking about in class. Summarize the articles, tell me how they connect, turn it in every single week, okay? They will put in a search term, like if we're talking about capitalism. Put in capitalism and see what comes up. And I said, you have to keep it current to the week, right? So then they come up with all these old articles. And throughout this process, I have to convince my students from the very beginning, you don't put in search words. Just bring up the page, see what titles there are on the headlines, see what jumps out as to what we've been talking about in class. Use it as if you had the newspaper right in front of you. So here comes my question, and this is the difference in quality that I see, website versus paper. In the paper form, which is what I prefer, and before everyone came, Paul and I were talking about this, because I was searching for a New York Times this morning. I went to several different places, and they were all out. And then Paula said, well, you can go online, right? And Tom was telling her, no, Liz doesn't do online. I don't. Okay, I like the paper. And part of the reason is that the paper is more holistic. As you're looking through it, you get to see all the things that are being talked about. You have a greater awareness, a bigger picture of the news every day. Versus when you go online, it's like you're cherry picking. You don't see everything, you're not getting the big picture, it's much more narrow and focused. And so you're missing a lot of the stuff that you don't even know is going on because you didn't go searching for it. And so that big picture, I think, is what our students are missing. I think that's what citizens are missing in general when they go to use news sources. I get really nervous about the narrow focus of a lot of our news. I think it's missing the broad, qualitative, overall picture. And I think as we get more narrow as citizens, we lose the community responsibility that we should have to have what we need to make the decisions on everyday things in terms of voting. And so my students at the end of the semester have figured out that it is actually easier if you just look on the website and you go for what they have on there during the day and pick articles. They figured out that was the easiest part, but it took them some time because how they go searching is they put in search terms. They aren't like doing it like I do, which is look at overall what's being covered in the newspaper and see what jumps out at you, right? So that's what's troubling to me about the quality of website versus paper. And also with the legitimacy of the comments, this is another thing. I'm not really convinced it's healthy communication. A lot of the comments that are on those bloggers that make the comments on whatever articles, it has nothing to do with facts. Maybe some of it does. But a lot of it has to do with just interjecting opinion into something that had nothing to do with opinion. I'm not talking about ep-ed, I'm just talking about regular articles. Had nothing to do with opinion, but yet they made it opinion, right? And so, in terms of quality, when you have that kind of communication, I think it's taken away from the overall quality of what the article was supposed to do in general. And that to me is not healthy, because I've been one of those people that have been so irate in an article, I'll go online and I'll post something, right? But when I look online, it's not a communication, it's not a healthy communication that's happening between the people. They just go and put inflammatory things up and then leave, and then come back and see if anybody said something mean to them, and so they can post something mean back. I don't really see that communication happening. I'd rather see the names attached. I'd rather see that legitimacy come back online as we see in the paper. That's the quality that I think is missing when you translate paper versus website. And I talk to my students about that, and that's what makes me nervous as a political science professor when I'm telling my students, this is what you need to be a good citizen, pay attention to newspapers, and what they're going to pay attention to is the websites.
She's not passionate, obviously.
One of the things that has happened is, we're kind of used to, in the print world, a front page, and that's that filtering again. Editors have said these are the most important stories. You kind of get that with the website, but what you see is stories cycle out a lot quicker. Something that's the top story first thing in the morning, by noon, that's ancient on the web. And if you're not fresher, and sometimes it's a car accident that has no real meaning beyond, who was immediately in there. I get a laugh line every time I go out and talk about the difference between the web and print, because I say, one of the selling points for continuing your print subscription is when you're done. There's only a certain number of pages and you're finished. You've got the summation, you've got the, whereas the web is, of course, endless. That's also a strength of that. But the definition of community is what's changing. And I think for a print newspaper, it was pretty easy to say this is the geographic area that we cover. And yes, we do state news and national news and world news, but our core is this county or these counties. And on the internet, your definition of community is, what am I passionate about? I care about cribbage. So I'm going to put my keyword cribbage in. It's exactly what you're talking about. And they may or may not hit on our website by doing that. And it's a fundamental change. No question about it.
I think, though, eventually people realize what your students realize, that rather than doing the Google search, just go right to the newspaper. But they're still searching then. Even if they go to the newspaper site, they're putting in a word and searching for, they're not reading every, although you're right, they have a better chance of seeing the headlines of the day. I just want to defend my position about the posts underneath the, when I was thinking about it, people used to gather in the old, this was before I was born, but they would gather at the general store and read the newspaper and then talk about it. And so I think to me, it's the same thing. What they do is they read the news, but then they say their opinions. What they think about, oh, this guy's an idiot, or that's not the way it happened, or, we get it all the time. You didn't cover that meeting, that isn't what happened, but it's their view of what happened. And I think that's been going on. That's how people react to the news, with their opinion.
I agree with you that I think that's healthy. What I think is not healthy is, in terms of electronic media, when there's not a face, people tend to communicate differently in a way that is not qualitative and can actually break down understanding rather than build it. And that's what troubles me when I see a lot of these posts. If they actually had to say this to each other's faces, I don't think they would say it the way they do. I don't think they would be as mean or condescending as they are.
Or they might not do it at all.
Yeah.
But I think what I see happening more and more is the rest of the posters are policing it, and they're calling them out, and they're saying, well, I went to that website that you suggested, and it's, you know, it's you know, a Tea Party site. It's not a factual site. I mean, they call each other out. And I think, and it's the same thing that would happen in conversation. I mean, you've probably done it. I mean, I've done it with my kids. They'll make a broad statement, and I'll say, now, wait a minute. You know, it's the same process. And I think it's healthy. I think it makes the community healthy. And yeah, we get bogged down in this personality stuff. But for the most part, I'm seeing more and more people police that. And I'm seeing people who have written letters to the editor that are posted on the website go in and defend their position again. You know, and I think that's healthy. And the reason I know that they have is because they do sign their name a second time. And yeah, I'd in a you know, in a dream world, it'd be wonderful if everybody put their name to their opinions. And you're right, when you're talking to someone face to face, you know their name. But I don't think it diminishes it. That's all.
I wanted to add, and Paul mentioned it, a technology that's emerging that I think will solve your problem, and that is this e-print edition where you're actually getting the actual full-blown paper online, but when you call it up, it's the whole page identical to what the print edition would be, except maybe updated. I wanted to digress for just a minute. It must have been about 25 years ago. I was invited to a very unique, quiet think tank seminar in Scottsdale, Arizona. And at that meeting were people like Al Newhart, Greg Pruitt, a lot of the media leaders that these people would know. And I think I was there as a token. I don't know why I was there, but anyway, I was invited. And it was interesting because there was a man named Roger Fiddler at the time who was sort of the technical guru for the former Knight Ridder Corporation that owned the Detroit Free Press in Michigan. And he already had the technology available because his office for Knight Ridder was right next door to Apple in Boulder, Colorado, two think tanks right together. And they had already made, and we saw the prototype for what is now iPad. And they didn't call it that at the time. And this was before the internet, so they were using a model where you would zap this pad off your cable connection. So it was there, and the difficulty was that the audience or the readers weren't. And as a former editor and publisher and general manager at one time, I was thinking, oh my God, we can finally get rid of these headaches with the printing press and the crew and newsprint and ink and all those other problems, and we can get down to why I got in the business in the first place, news. And we couldn't catch it then. And so it isn't like it was it's a new idea. But now I'm optimistic, particularly with the readers that we're getting through Amazon.com, and now this iPad, which I really have only played with once. But I think the prices are going to come down, and I think we already have demonstrated we have the technology, and I think this may be an answer to the question that we all have, a lot of us have in social science, is this idea that you get these little McNuggets of information that really don't give much at all, except you want to know that Michigan State's, number 8 in the country, this nation right now, and that's all I needed to know. But
Yep.
other than that, I think that it'll evolve, and I guess the bottom line is technology is going to quickly remedy that issue that I'm bothered by myself in our classes. And Dennis, I think you had something and I cut you off. Did you?
Well, I think we role model too, because I'm lucky I'm in a faith tradition that I can go to 5 o'clock Saturday Mass, which gives me Sunday morning back. So in our town, even in Petoskey, you can buy the Chicago Trib, you can get the New York Times, I can get the Free Press, and even though my wife's an RN, MSN, teaching for Lake State Nursing, she loves to consume newspapers. I love to consume newspapers. So on Monday, Tuesday, when I first see the students, I'm holding up the hard copy with sometimes pen marks on it. Because when you have it, you can mark it up, and you can write questions to yourself. And then you role model that type of thing to your students, and they know that. They also know, if they've ever been in my office, my favorites list starts with 7 different national newspapers, and I try once a day to get in there, at least to read the headlines, and then if I get into something, I'll drop down and go deeper. And I have children living in Minneapolis and Milwaukee and Detroit, and I want to have conversations with them so I know what's going on in their hometowns. And so it's just role modeling. And by the way, nursing students at Lake State who are seniors are doing reading logs because that nursing department saw what we were doing, and Rosemary said, you know, this takes a little extra time, but damn it, they're reading. They're reading that diagnosis. They're reading that chapter now. I don't have to carry that lecture. So there's all kinds of things we
And
can
critically
do.
thinking.
Can-
Yes.
Can I turn the tables
Yeah.
and maybe ask a question of
You bet.
our Delta College people? You know, you're kind of on the forefront in Michigan of a place where 7-day delivery of the paper was present a year or so ago, but is not present now. They went down to 3 days a week, and then they added back newsstand only on Tuesday. And you're almost to an election. So I guess I'm curious from a political science point of view or a community point of view, what has happened as those newspapers have shifted dramatically to web first, still with some print on Sunday and Thursday and some days, but do you think that's affected the information available to people in the election? Do you think, are there some good things about it?
I think one of the reasons why the readership went down, and I think Midland Daily News still delivers 7 days a week, does it?
I think so.
Okay, I think Midland delivers still 7 days a week, but Bay City Times, Saginaw News, which is owned by the same company, they went down to 3 days a week and put the rest on the web. On the first day of classes, I always ask my students, who reads the newspaper at least once a day? I'm lucky if I get one person that raises their hand. How many people read a newspaper once a week? And I get the question, well, does the cartoon section count, right? And if so, everybody's hand went up.
Yes,
Okay. And so I think that was the problem. And I think because of that, going on the web didn't really change much because the people that read the paper every day just switched the way in which they were reading it and it went on the web. So I don't think it necessarily changed much in terms of what I see from my perspective on how politics is run at the local level because of how little readership there was to begin with. And I just find that to be so unfortunate. And that's why I require my students to read newspapers every week. I said, if you're going to be good citizens, let's try just once a week. Let's just try just once a week opening up those newspapers. And, you know, by the end of the semester, I can't get all the students that like doing it. But a few of them said, you know, I think I'm going to continue doing this after I'm done with your class. This wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. And I had a student come tell me last week when she was turning her current events journal for the week, she said, I'm kind of liking reading these newspapers. It's like a soap opera. You get to open it up and you're following what all the politicians are doing and all their drama. And she says, I look forward to figuring out how it changed this week from last week, right? And I'm like, wow, this is, something's happening here that's pretty positive, right? So I think there's hope. But I think with the 24/7 news channels, that's just replaced what people think is news. And I think we need to bring people back to where the real news is, which is with newspapers. And that's why I really worry about the death of newspapers in any kind of way, because I think there goes our one good source for our citizens to use that is the best at being objective, that can provide them good information to vote responsibly.
Well, as one of 7 liberals in Midland, Michigan, I refuse to support any right-wing loony newspaper. So, just a couple years ago, I tried to get it subscribed to the Detroit paper. They don't deliver to Midland. I can't even get it. So I am totally online. Except, you know, MLive, and I think the point is, the news sources in our area, Tri-Cities, I think they're pretty weak. I don't know if you think the same thing.
You know, many state and national newspapers do not deliver to our area, in the Tri-County area, Saginaw, Bay, Midland. I have to literally go pick up a New York Times every day because they do not deliver to Saginaw.
Oh, to Midland, though, they do, yeah.
And so I think within our Tri-County area, we have a dearth, a void of interest in newspapers in general. And so that really bothers me as a political scientist looking at the city. And the city of Saginaw is pretty corrupt in terms of its government. I mean, a few years ago, they found out that the city of council members were using taxpayer money to pay cell phone bills with. Okay? I mean, the former mayor of the council got in trouble and was finally convicted of insurance fraud when she set her own car on fire, okay, to get some money. Okay? I mean, it's pretty corrupt. But the problem is that there is a Saginaw News that covers the city, but the people inside the city don't read it, right? And how can you keep politicians responsible? How can you keep a newspaper going when you don't have the readership base to keep it alive. And I think that's what a lot of small towns or medium-sized towns are facing right now, as more and more people move away from newspapers and toward 24/7 news.
What bothers me is that when I read online all the time, I'll read a story, I have to, it's a train wreck, I have to look at the comments below, and I hate doing that because they're always so negative and nasty and vicious. You know, why do I need to read these horrible comments? I'll read the article, I will form my own opinions, and I don't care what other people think, but it's like a train wreck I have to see. It's name-calling and vicious and nasty, so that's why I think we need newspapers, because I like to actually read something and say, okay, you know what? I don't care what you think. I'll form my own opinion. And I think, understand that. I mean, do you understand that when you watch the blogs and so forth, they're vicious.
And also
I
on
hate that.
that
So
note-
personal.
On that note, when my students have to read when they go online to read the articles, they tell me that they've read some of the comments below it, and they said, gosh, this is why we don't like politics. I mean, on the first
Yeah.
day, when I ask my students, why don't you pay attention to politics? Their answer is, oh, it's just mean. They're just vicious. You know, they're just too personal. They're corrupt, all of this kind of thing. And then they look on the articles, and then they look at the comments, and they see the same thing. And they're like, this is why we don't do this, because, you know, we don't want to deal with all this back and forth nastiness out there.
Well, unfortunately, I have to unplug us. It's past our time.
Oh, no.
Even though it was a small group, I enjoyed the dialogue today. It was very healthy, and I appreciate it. Thank you to our panelists for taking your time to come, and thank you for our audience for participating. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you very, very much. It was good to see both of you.
It was good to see you too.